one of the other shows I wanted to ask you about was the TV show Paris with James Earl Jones. And the more I learn about that show, the more I've found people saying how incredible of a show it was. What do you remember about that show and how did that role come about for you?
I'm not very clear on it, truly.
Do you remember much about James Earl Jones and the first
Yeah,
time
I
you
was
met
in
him?
awe of James.
What hit you first, his voice or the very stature of the man?
The voice, I'd heard the voice, very distinct voice. And when I was told I had an audition, there's a show, a new show with James Earl Jones. They're looking for a guy to play his partner. You're going to be a detective with James Earl Jones. I'm going to work with James Earl Jones. Yes.
And this was about a year after Star Wars, right? I mean,
Yes.
so, I mean, I'm curious if when you hear his voice, even all these years later, do you hear the voice of your co-star or do you hear Darth Vader or maybe Mufasa or this is CNN? Which voice do you hear?
Wow. I had heard James on a couple of commercials. And I said, wow, what an amazing voice. His deep, booming voice. He said, well, his father was an actor. Oh. He said, but James Earl became a big star. Broadway, off Broadway. And he's going to do the series now. And there's a role we'd like you to read for. Okay, I read and oh my God. They said, before I said thank you and I started to leave, and someone from the audition room came running out after me and said, you got it. They want you to play James Earl Jones' partner. I said, get out of here. I said, no, seriously. They called my agent who submitted me and said that you have the part of James Earl Jones' partner. And wow.
Well, I was going to ask you, we're talking about all of this history and how these things came about. I mean, I'm curious, what sticks out to you about the kind of roles you got to play back then? I mean, do you think those kinds of roles still exist today?
I could not believe any of the things that were happening. I knew I was a comic. That was my bent. I became a comic because I didn't want to get beat up all the time on the streets. And I became good as being a comic. And suddenly you want me to play a very straight and serious role opposite one of the best actors in the business. And they said, if we didn't believe you could do it, we wouldn't offer it to you. I never had much confidence in myself. Never did. And suddenly, this is being told to me. This role is thrust. They're waiting my acceptance. I never had that happen in my life. I was always pushed aside when it came to anything. You're too big, you're too small, you're not the right size, you're not the right rate. And suddenly, you're perfect.
Did you eventually find the confidence? Through doing all of these things, did you eventually get to the point where you're like, okay, obviously they're picking me for these things. I must be worthy of this in some way. Or did you always feel insecure in that way?
I always felt insecure. so many, many, many times. How many times I've said to myself, they're going to learn about the real you, and
They're gonna figure it out.
they're going to take a pass. Oh, every time I went in for an audition, I would read the part and I'd go, oh man, this is not me. And then a friend of mine, who was a wonderful actor, and he said, you got to believe in yourself, man. Agents are not going to submit you if you were not right for the part. And I thought, they're submitting me because I'm a nice guy, yeah, they're going to be submitting a bunch of other people as well. So I forever had no confidence. I tried my best. For sure, that I was good at. But it was called trying, not winning. And suddenly, one day, my wife said, look, if you weren't right, they wouldn't submit you. And if you weren't right, the people wouldn't want to see you. The people that are doing the casting. I said, well, you're right. Most of my life, my young life, I was wrong. I was wrong for the neighborhood. I was wrong in so many areas of my life. Meeting young ladies and asking for a date and being turned down. Some would accept and we'd have a fun time. But there was so much negative about my existence. I was born late in life to my mother and father. So I was an accident. That was what I was told. So that kind of mood kept coming up for me. You're all wrong for this. You're all wrong. No, you're not. You're right. But try to convince me of that. If I'm accepted at something right now, I consider myself very lucky. Not saying, yeah, why not? I'm right for it and I deserve it. No, I just say, oh God, I'm lucky to get that. So that's the kind of life that I've led. I'm just very, very lucky, really.
Let's talk a little bit more about your book. How did the idea for writing a book come about?
My wife, when I told her about some of the stuff that I've done, she was encouraging. She said, first of all, it's hard to believe that you did that many things. And we started talking about a book, she and I. She did all the typing. I started writing everything down on a piece of paper, on a pad, and she did all the correction. She wrote the book. It's an amazing, amazing lady. Because every few pages, she would stop and say, now wait a minute. Wait a minute. How old were you when you carried a gun? And I said, 12. She said, now think about it. 12, you had a gun? I said, yeah, one of the mob guys on the street gave me a 25 caliber pistol. So she questioned me about just about everything. She wrote the book. I just gave her the stories of my life. She put it into prose. And people who have read the book were truly astounded. They're saying, you did these things. I said, yeah. I didn't think about it when I did it. I just did it.
It's amazing how you went from the streets of Harlem, to working with Sammy Davis Jr. to, working with people like Al Pacino and Robert Redford and James Earl Jones. I mean, and I'm sure the book is going to have some of those stories, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I tried to touch upon some of them a little bit in the show today, but for those who want to get the whole story, make sure you buy that book.
Yes. They can get me directly, hankgarrett.biz, autographed, and they can get it for $25.
Well, we'll put that up on the screen for everybody to see. And I so much appreciate you being on the show with us today, Hank. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much
Thank
for
you.
taking the time to talk with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Hank Garrett.
Thank you so much.